Hi everyone, welcome back to the 21 and Sensory podcast with me, Emily. I am super excited for today's episode as I have a special guest, Holly Smale. Holly is the author of Geek Girl, Model Misfit, Picture Perfect, All That Glitters, and Head Over Heels, and Forever Geek. That's a lot of books. As well as 2 seasonal Geek Girl supplements called Sunny Side Up and All Wrapped Up. So Geek Girl was the #1 best-selling young adult fiction title in the UK in 2013, which is insane, and it was shortlisted for several major awards, and it has been translated into a whopping 28 languages worldwide, which is utter madness. So I've got Holly on today because also, recently, she has been diagnosed with autism, and she's written some fab articles on her diagnosis for The Times and The Sun, which you might have seen, as well as being interviewed on multiple radio and TV shows. So she's very popular at the moment. So I've just reached out to ask her if she might like to come on my podcast to chat a little more about her diagnosis and being an author. So yeah, Holly, would you like to say hello?
Hello, thank you for having me.
No worries. It's so kind of you to come on and being open to chat to me.
Yeah, I'm excited about it.
Cool. So I think a lot of people might have potentially read your articles in The Times and The Sun and seen you kind of on radio and TV lately. You've been everywhere in a good way. So you recently got your diagnosis of autism, and I just want to say huge congratulations and welcome to the club/community.
Best word.
Yeah. So do you want to kind of explain, because you were, I don't know if you're still 39? Are you still?
I've got a few
still 39.
I turn 40, but yeah, I'm still
okay.
39.
Fine. Do you want to sort of explain a bit of the kind of backstory to your diagnosis and the process that led up to it?
Yeah, so I've known I was different, in quotation marks, since birth, essentially. Right back to my earliest memories of being 3 years old. And I knew that I didn't seem to feel the way other people felt, or communicate, or just I just knew that there was a gap between me and the rest of the world. I remember watching children playing outside when I was 3 years old, and I was sitting in the corner with my book in the dark, staring at them through the window and just thinking, they are weird. Humans are weird, and I knew that I felt like an alien, and I knew that there was something that was different about me, and I didn't know what that difference was, which only got deeper as I got older. I had no idea what it was, and although some of those differences were extraordinary and gave me great, gifts, I would say, some of them made it very, very difficult. At school, around other people, I started to really struggle, was bullied horribly at secondary school, found it overwhelming, used to hide under coats on the floor of the changing rooms because it was too loud, too noisy, everyone was being too mean, I was too confused. So I'd sort of black out underneath coats. And, those differences which left me feeling like an alien my entire life. In my 30s, they just became overwhelming. And I kept thinking I'd grow out of it at some point and that I would learn how to be a human better. And I didn't. And I was struggling with relationships, was struggling with friendships, was struggling with work. And I was really struggling with depression and anxiety on quite a severe basis. And then COVID happened. And I kind of came off the treadmill that I'd been on with my career for a decade, that was either writing or doing book festivals or traveling on the road to schools. And I kind of came off that treadmill because, legal requirements. And I had a lot of time for myself. And I was still struggling, and I had an enormous meltdown last summer, which was terrifying and knocked me out for 12 full hours, and took me 4 days to recover from, which was it's not the first time that's happened. It is a life regularity for me. And I think because I'd come off that treadmill, I suddenly went, hang on, there's something here that I need to I can't handle anymore. I need to know what's happening. So I started researching, started Googling, Googling, why don't I understand other human beings? Why do I feel like an alien? Why do I keep having meltdowns? And the word that came up over and over again was autistic. And I kept thinking, that can't be me. I'm nearly 40. Like, that's something that happens when you're at school, surely. Like, that's when you get found to be autistic. Yeah. The more I Googled and the more I researched and the more I watched YouTube videos, I mean, an autistic person will almost always be good at researching. Yeah. So I really dove deep, and the more I watched, the more I identified, and the more I thought, oh my goodness. And I remember crying. I don't cry very easily, but I remember crying and just thinking, I think this might be it. And went to my therapist the next day and said, I think I might be autistic. And I kind of expected her to sort of send me away and go, don't be ridiculous. But she just gave me this really compassionate look. And then she went, it doesn't change who you are. And I was like, how long have you known? It was like, about 3 years. So, which a lot of people have been really like shocked and surprised at. But I'm like, that's not how therapy works. They're not diagnostic. They're not really allowed to just go, by the way, you're autistic. So, she'd been supporting me without labeling it. But from that point on, did more research, went for a clinical diagnosis because I really needed to know that I was on the right path. And it came back in October. So it was life-changing in so many ways. And I think that my emotions were all over the place. And they still sometimes are, to be honest. It's rage, and grief and sadness and celebration and joy and freedom, and it's all mixed up. So it's a real roller coaster.
Gosh, wow, it's really amazing to hear. Like, I think I read in your article about you saying about like it's like you said all these different things. Like it's kind of a relief, but also then you have the grief of for you not knowing for almost 40 years, and it could have been well, it would have been beneficial to know much sooner, wouldn't it? Like it's frustrating, and I totally get that. As someone who was diagnosed age 25, I feel like, I wish I'd known sooner. So I can only imagine how you must feel. Like, it must be so annoying.
It makes sense of your life suddenly, you're like, you see it with a different lens. And the unfortunate thing about being so late diagnosed for me is that, you've internalized the impressions that you make on other people. So, the words they use and the labels and the way they treat you. And as someone who's neurodivergent, and you'll know this too, like you essentially grow up believing that you're broken in some way. And that can come from the more severe bullying, as in, I used to be stabbed with pencils and, pushed against walls and all that kind of thing. But it can also come from the kind of more insidious stuff, like, why do you talk like that? Why do you stand like that? Why do you move like that? Why do you, it can be just constant questioning of, why are you not like us? And you absorb it. And it becomes part of you, especially when it's from such a young age. I mean, like, as in first memories, all I can remember my entire life is being told that there's something wrong with me. And so when you hit 39 and you've had 4 decades of that, it's so hard to unwire. It's so hard to unwire that. It's so hard to go, actually, there's nothing wrong with me. And just because I'm always told that there's something wrong with me and that my brain works in a strange way, doesn't mean that's right. So, and especially, the anger and frustration a little bit of looking back and realising that there were adults who knew around me. Like the doctor who at 17, I went to the doctors when I was 17 because I was really struggling with depression, which, as you know, comorbidity of mental health problems, because how can you possibly live in a world where you're constantly being told that you're broken and not get depressed?
Exactly.
It's just impossible. Like, of course you're going to be depressed. I kept thinking, why will no one talk to me? Why will no one play with me? Why does everything I say get misunderstood? So I was really severely depressed, and I went to the doctor, and he had been my doctor since birth, and he said to me, Holly, your brain is wired in a different way to most people's. And that's not a bad thing. It just means that, you have a beautiful brain, but it's wired differently, which was very kind of him. But looking back, I'm like, just say autistic. I would say wired differently. I was a 17-year-old autistic person, which meant that went over my head. I was like, unless you've used the word, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So I just spent lots of time going, wired differently. What does that mean? So he clearly knew, but it you look back and you think, what would my life have been like if I'd actually known?
Yeah, exactly. Like that's so tricky to, now that you have the diagnosis, just walking out from a diagnosis and thinking like everything's going to change, but actually you just spend a lot of time looking back and thinking, oh, I know why I was like that, or different like traits or different like bits and pieces that like fall into place. Have you like found that at all?
Yeah, and I'm sure you found that as well. Like, you start seeing things through a different lens.
Yeah.
But also, the frustration of, if there's a moment when you come. I was very emotional for a long time, and it took me a long time to process. I didn't speak out about it for 10 months after diagnosis because I wanted to make sure I understood it and I processed it, and all that kind of stuff. But it's like I said, up and down, and you're looking through your past and you're seeing it in a different light. But you also have this kind of expectation that things are going to be very different immediately.
Yeah.
Like the diagnosis is going to change everything on the spot. And the reality is it doesn't work like that, because like it or not, people are still going to carry on judging. And you are still going to be the person who has built a life on masking and trying to fit in and being ashamed of who you actually are and what you actually feel and think. And that doesn't change overnight. I still don't quite know how not to mask. And I don't know how you feel about that either, but these are things that you've built your life and identity on.
Yeah, exactly. And you almost don't realise that you are masking because it's something you just like slip into, and then you'll come home and you'll be like, oh my God, I've been masking that whole time. Like, why was I doing that? It's just draining.
Well, I'm exhausted, and also just from an identity perspective, before I was diagnosed, it's quite funny because I've had a therapist for 3 years now, because when I hit, how old am I now? So when I hit 37, I am so broken that I need someone to help me. And so I went and got a therapist, and I literally sat in her chair and said, I'm broken and you need to tell me what is broken about me. And obviously she was like, you're not broken. But for the next years, we talked about why I felt that way. Literally an hour a week for 3 years. I felt like I was always fake. Like I felt like I was always pretending. And I couldn't put my finger on what it was that I was pretending. But it felt like I was always like an actor on a stage, and that every word I said and every facial expression I made and every way I moved and the way I sat in a chair and the way I held my hands was fake. So I was basically, that was one thing that I talked about, and I didn't know that there was a word for it and that the word was masking. But I knew that I felt like I was an actress all the time, and that had been picked up on by people I was dating, for instance, who would be like, you feel fake. You feel like you're fake to me. And that can be distressing as well, because you're like, I'm really trying. I don't know what you want from me. Like, I don't know how to be more real, because somewhere in the back of your mind, it's dangerous to be real. You know that if you're real, you're going to get hurt.
So you saying about masking, it's really interesting. Like you say, it's like you're putting on an act and you feel like an actress, because that's definitely how I feel. And it feels like it's like a full-time job. It's like a full commitment. And I don't think people realise, like you said, like how draining it can be, how much it can like impact you and like, set you on the edge of a meltdown and things like that. Like it's so difficult to explain masking to someone who isn't neurodiverse. But I think you've like summed it up really well. Like it's putting on this act, it's putting on this like front all the time, and it's difficult to know when you're doing it. And like you said, like in relationships, it's really difficult because you want to be yourself, but also you kind of don't want to be yourself if you're like awkward, like I am kind of thing. And I totally get that.
It's I think you hit the nail on the head with, you don't understand if you're neurodiverse, because I've been asked in interviews like, are you masking now? And I'm like, yeah, of course I'm asking now. Like I'm on a national no, of course I'm not just, but they'll be like, how are you masking? It's like not quite that simple, it's a lot more complex than that. And also the mask changes depending on where you are and who you're with. I might mask less with my sister, for instance, and much harder on a first date, but you're still always, there's always a gap between me and other people. that gap never goes away. So even when best friends are like, do you mask with me? I'm like, I want to say no.
Yeah.
It's expensive. The reality is there is no human being on the planet that I don't mask with.
Yeah.
Because that's the essence of what it feels like to be an alien. Like I am communicating with other humans as an alien, and masking is how I do that. So yeah, and especially in relationships, like the few times the mask drops and I let myself be me, essentially, it has historically been really, really unpleasant. They pull me up on it, or they have a go at me for it, or they tell me I'm weird, or I had one guy go, I just find it really unattractive when you do that. And I was just like, right. Well, I won't be doing that again. So yeah, masking is exhausting, and I'm in constant awe of all of us who are surviving as humans while also having to act like humans.
Yeah. And it just feels like everyone else seems to have a guide, or like, I don't know, something to the, like, some sort of book to refer to, like on relationships and social stuff. And like, I just feel like as people who are autistic, we're just like bumbling through life, like just trying to work it out, and everyone else seems to know what to do. I don't know if you feel that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always feel a sense of vertigo as well, because you'll be like, okay, it's going well, social interaction, I'm doing okay, everything's as I expected it. And then you'll put one foot wrong, and the whole interaction will shift, and you'll suddenly have this sense of falling where you're like, oh, that went wrong, or that went direction, or you're like upset someone, and they'll be like, what do you mean by that? And you're like, no, okay, great. And or they'll say something and you'll have misunderstood, and the world will tip. And it's really disorientating, because not only is it upsetting when it happens, but you're always kind of tiptoeing around in case it does.
Yeah.
So it's like walking on a world that is constantly having earthquakes and wondering when you're going to fall into a crack.
Yeah. It's very uncertain, isn't it? And it's just constant like juggling and like keeping up appearances of, I'm fine.
Yeah. And also, I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm also dyspraxic at the same time. It's like quite a common 2 neurodivergencies, plus dyscalculia, so 3 neurodivergencies. So that I'm kind of quite interested and thinking about a lot at the moment, like how they play into each other. Because obviously when you're dyspraxic, you have to mask as well. And when I'm exhausted because of my autistic bit of my brain is overwhelmed, it will have a direct impact on my dyspraxia. So I stop being able to, for instance, walk properly, or I stop being able to pick keys up or use my hands. Or so they have so you spend a lot of time masking both physically and mentally and emotionally, which, no wonder I need like 10 days off every time I have one conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I was going to ask you, and I think I kind of mentioned it in my kind of outline. How do you manage, obviously you're a very successful author, how do you manage the kind of the social side of it and the PR side of it? How do you cope with the people side of it is what I'm trying to get at? Or did you just kind of mask your way through that?
I mean, it's one of the greatest ironies in the world, isn't it? That you have a skill set that involves sitting on your own and making up the world and being away from people, and then they're like, "Well done, you've done that really well. Now go and talk to lots of people about it." You're like, "Oh." I've historically struggled, and over the last 10 years, my career has been affected by the fact that I don't go to parties, and I don't go to book launches, and I am terrible at interacting with other authors. So from the social aspect, I haven't done it, which, hasn't necessarily been good generally. From an actual PR and book tour type perspective, it comes in short bursts, which means I'm usually kind of prepared for it. It'll be like, you're doing a lot this week, in which case I will try and make myself as comfortable as I can, and give myself a lot of breaks, a lot of downtime. But I will inevitably get physically ill. I don't know if you find this as well, but because I internalize and mask so hard, my body will physically just disintegrate afterwards. So after a book tour, I'll be in bed for 2 weeks. So it's hard. It's hard on the system. Very, very difficult.
Yeah, I don't it's really interesting to hear like how you cope with it, because it shows that you can definitely still be a successful author no matter kind of mental health or like other conditions and stuff. But I don't think people realize the sheer toll that all this takes on you in the background, and the fact that you're having to put on this front all the time and having to keep kind of positive and stuff, but actually you pay the price for 2 weeks having to lie down. Like that's a huge thing that I don't think a lot of other authors appreciate.
No, it's like this again. I mean, obviously it is a natural invisible disability, and when an author that I know actually messaged me a couple of weeks ago when the story came out, and was like, I'm like so impressed because everything I've done, you've basically done it backwards and in heels, which is the quote from Gene Kelly and Ginger Rogers. I think Gene Kelly, no, it would be Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, where she has to say, everything he does, I do backwards and in heels, because essentially, when you've got book tours and promotional interviews and TV and all that kind of stuff, it's hard for a normal person. But if you're neurodivergent, like that is so difficult, and you have to do it because it's part of your career. And if you want to do well in that, you've got to do it. But it's really, really, really draining, and people don't see the stress that it puts you through. A 10-minute interview on Sky for me will wipe me out for 3 days, and I just won't be able to function or do anything else. So I think it's important to show that we are capable of anything, but also the toll that it takes and the support that we need, essentially. I've been lucky actually that my publishers, even before my diagnosis, were well aware that I was that I had support needs that were important if they wanted me to produce anything.
Okay, that's good.
I mean, that's the thing. Over the years, like I've been with them 10 years and my agent for 11 years. And they knew, for instance, that I was never going to meet a deadline, never going to happen. And they knew that I needed a lot of time between events, that I wasn't going to be going to their parties and their launches and that kind of thing. They took all of that, really compassionately, which I think shows you that that you can be compassionate and supportive without even the diagnosis, which is really good, I think.
That's really good. Like, just to hear that your publishers are like on board, and like I feel like sometimes half the battle is getting the support or the accommodations to kind of help you feel like you can do things a bit more kind of like naturally. So that's really good to hear that they're understanding of that, and that they kind of give you that leeway for like deadlines and stuff like that, because I think anyone would find that challenging, let alone like being neurodiverse. So I definitely get that.
I mean, it's not, and I think some people might see it as an excuse, like I'm just not, and it's like, it's not quite it's not really an excuse. It's just that, for instance, if I've got a deadline, but I've also got a book tour, I can't, my brain can't do both those things at once. It can't be traveling around the country talking to thousands of children while also writing a novel. And I'm going to need that time to be physically sick afterwards. So, it's just taking that kind of stuff into account, which makes a massive difference, because we have so many great stories and talents and abilities, across the board, neurodivergent people. So it's just about making sure that people are giving us the support we need to give that to the world, So winnowing us out.
It's so true. And have you sort of found, since you've sort of, I don't know if it's the right word to say, like come out as autistic, or
I keep calling it come out, because someone said like AUT, coming out, which I love. I think it's I've come out.
That's such a good way of doing it.
So that's my rephrasing. I've come out.
Come out. Love it. How have you found, like, have you been like, because I wanted to talk to you about kind of like autism in women and the late diagnosis. Have you found that you've been hearing from a lot of people, and especially women, at all? Like, how have you found like just it, like how your diagnosis has been received, which sounds really weird because obviously not many people are that like public about it, but how have you found it?
Well, overwhelming, to be honest. Like I knew when I got the diagnosis, because of my job and the things that I've written about, and I wrote a neurodivergent character for 10 years without realizing that she was neurodivergent. So I knew that my public standing and my job meant that I I had to think about it carefully, and I had the support of my publishers, which was amazing, where they were like, we support you. We're glad you've told us about this diagnosis. That will help us support you on a personal level. Do you want to talk about it publicly? And that's completely up to you. And I had to think about it, and I was like, this potentially making myself very vulnerable, but it also could help a lot of people, and it could help destigmatize it, and it could just give a different voice that isn't necessarily the male prescribed media version that we see, that likes trains. So I decided to do that piece for the Times, and I genuinely didn't think there was going to be much of a reaction. I just thought there'd be kind of like, yeah. Figures. So I've been overwhelmed by the feedback and people reaching out to me from so many different areas. Obviously the autistic community has been overwhelmingly warm and receptive. I've not had any. I've only had one troll, which I think is almost disappointing, because I was kind of like, I've kind of got my fighting gloves on, like get ready, and I only got one. So I was like, oh, that was a waste. But yeah, they've been incredibly supportive. But also, parents of teenagers who are either going through the diagnosis process now, or have been through it recently, or haven't been through it, and they've suddenly gone, oh my God, like read the piece and gone, things are starting to click into place. Or adults who, things are starting to click into place. Like, I think that, I've always been a fan of words, as you can tell by my hyperlexic inability to shut up.
No, it's good.
But I think the power of words, I think the power of an article in a newspaper to literally change lives, and I'm not saying that in a narcissistic way, I'm saying as in by speaking about stuff, we all get to connect more, we all get to understand each other more. And for people to go, oh, that could be me, or that could be my daughter, or that could be my granddaughter or my grandson, like that's powerful. And there's been so many. One made me very emotional, actually, who was one of my readers that I met 5 years ago, and she was much younger.
Okay.
And she's now a teenager, like upper end of a teenager. And she's diagnosed autistic. And she'd been really struggling with it. But she read my piece and was like, if my favourite author is, then I'm proud to be as well. And that is an amazing thing to hear, an amazing thing. So yeah, it's it's been an amazing response, and way beyond what I could have expected.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that, because it must have been a scary thing to do, but even just for me to see another woman out there who, has a career and, is a professional in her field and is successful, who is autistic, it's so amazing to see, because you're like, just like that teenage girl said to you, it's someone you can look up to, and someone who is, doing well in life despite, struggling with, a diagnosis and coming to terms with things. And it's just so nice to be able to see, or kind of even just hear about someone else in the same kind of like boat as you. Like, not in, like, I know it's really bad, like, obviously you struggle a lot.
Same boat.
Yeah, same boat, exactly. But like, I know you struggle a lot with stuff, but it's so nice to see someone else like who gets it.
Yeah, no, I know. And when I was going through my like research period before my diagnosis, I was trying to look for people, women in the industry, of any industry, to be honest, that were openly aut. And there weren't really that many. Daryl Hannah, pretty much. There was an absence, which left me feeling very isolated and alone. And actually, one of the life-changing, I know it's a very hyperbolic way of putting it, but one thing that really made a big difference to me was that I had started watching Grey's Anatomy.
Okay.
And the more I watched it, the more I realised that Christina Yang is like me, like she is me. She doesn't mask like I do, which I found fascinating. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen Grey's Anatomy.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, so Christina doesn't really mask at all. I mean, the only time she masks is when she's in a relationship with Dr. Burke and people tell her, and every now and then she'll try and be someone different. But generally, she's pretty proud. She doesn't really care about other people thinking that she's weird or a robot. But it was pretty clear to me very quickly that she was an undiagnosed autistic woman in the media. And watching her journey and how she was, and her fearlessness and lack of shame over who she was, and also her life journey, the storyline about not wanting children, which is something that I'm kind of going through at the moment. The impact was enormous. I mean, enormous, and to the point where I'd go to a therapy session and I would spend an entire hour talking about Grey's Anatomy, which is not money well spent, to be honest. But enormous impact, because we instinctively want to connect to and relate to fictional characters around us and real people. And something that, as I know and other neurodivergent people know, is we don't get to see ourselves reflected. We don't get to look into cartoons and art and film and music and go, oh, there I am. That's someone that I can understand and aspire towards and, make sense of myself via. We don't get it because there's no real, there isn't much out there. Unless you're Sheldon. And even he's not freaking actually diagnosed as autistic. So, I think that the impact of Christina Yang in my ability to understand myself and be proud of myself meant that when I came out, I was like, if this helps other people feel the way that Christina Yang made me feel, if my character being openly autistic helps younger people feel like they've been seen, then I'm doing it regardless of the negative impact that it might have on my own personal sanity sometimes.
I definitely get that. And just like you say, just not being able to find anyone to relate to in these shows, and all the male characters they don't have a diagnosis of autism, but everyone's they're probably autistic, and it's difficult, isn't it? Because you just want to see yourself, and you just want to be able to relate to something. And I definitely get what you're saying about Grey's Anatomy. You kind of see that in the storyline as she goes along, and it's just nice to kind of feel like, oh, she's struggling with the same things as me.
That's that having children storyline was exactly how I feel about the whole situation, and that was new for me, to be able to see that playing out as a woman on TV. And I kept thinking, what would have happened if, for instance, I think I'm going to write to Matt Groening. He'll never reply, but the impact of, for instance, Lisa Simpson being openly autistic as opposed to just very, very clearly autistic, but not actually diagnosed. That would have a worldwide impact. We would be able to claim her for us, it would change the way people see it, and for girls especially it would change the way they see it. And the pushback, because I wrote a tweet the other week saying, Lisa Simpson, so very clearly canonically undiagnosed autistic girl, the pushback was insane. So many people, neurotypical people, going, how dare you try and take her for yours, she's just a really clever girl. And I'm like,
right,
I don't think you understand autism at all, at all. And that is exactly why we have to speak out and talk about it, because yes, Lisa Simpson's very clever. I'm also very clever. It doesn't stop me being autistic.
Exactly.
You're she's also easily overwhelmed. She's also got no social skills whatsoever. Her moral thinking is rigid. She is constantly black and white thinking. She monologues. She's hyperlexic. She ticks every freaking box. And everyone's like, look, she's just clever, leave her alone. I'm like, there's nothing wrong with being autistic, but imagine if Matt Groening was like, yes, here is an episode of Lisa Simpson is diagnosed autistic, life-changing for everyone.
And I think that's almost how women go under the radar, is that, oh, you're just seen as clever, or you're just seen as well-behaved, or you're doing fine in school, so you know, you can't be. Where actually,
it's so obvious. And it's fascinating from a gender perspective, because that's something I studied at master's level, was Shakespeare and gender. So, once a geek, always a geek. But I'm fascinated in that kind of gender and feminism and stuff. And the reality is that for things like, special interests, for instance, if you're a boy and you have special interests, and those special interests are Lego or trains or trucks or whatever it is, then, if you're a little boy and you've got 55 trucks and you've lined them up in an order, and, you're hiding under tables and all that kind of stuff, it's likely that an adult's going to be like, we might want to look at this a little bit closer. If you're a little girl and you've got 55 Barbies lined up in a row, they'll just go, oh, look at her and her dolls. Yeah. So it's so ingrained in our gender that, and the reality is that I don't know, like, I'm sure you know the background of autism study, probably even better than me. But it was always originated with boys, there were no girls in the studies because they were like, oh, look at this thing that separates little boys from other little boys. So we weren't part of it. We weren't part of the narrative. And so everything that they looked at was male. Everything that they, used as examples was male. And that carried on for decades. So, of course, we're still catching up. And it presents differently in girls and boys a lot of the time. So, yeah, I'm hoping that it will change, but it's going to be a slow process.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, even just you talking about, like, a tweet and people's reaction, and, it's 2021 and we're still having these same, like, conversations and, backlash on stuff, when it's your opinion and you're autistic and you can see it in Lisa and stuff like that. And, there's still a way to go, definitely.
Yeah. And it's weird that the emotion that comes with that, because, when I wrote that tweet, which was that, here are some girls and women who are canonically undiagnosed. So not just Lisa Simpson, but obviously Christina Yang, Anna Breen Gables, Amelie, Beth from Queen's Gambit.
Yes.
These are women who are very clearly ticking every autistic box, And it got retweeted by a number of autistic specialist psychologists and diagnostic clinicians. These are people who know what they're talking about and they agree. Yeah. So it wasn't just like, oh, I'm a person, I have an opinion. It's like, this opinion is pretty airtight at this point. But the emotions it brought up with neurotypical people was almost fascinating. Their disgust, like, how dare you? This is outrageous that you would kind of say that these people have a problem. You're like, I never said they had a problem. I said they were autistic. Yeah.
Exactly.
So yeah, that shows that we have so much more to do in changing the conversation around autism. So that it's no longer an insult.
Yeah, and also I think like I really appreciate you like being open and like talking about like autistic characters and things like that on your Instagram and Twitter. But I think sometimes people will look at like your content and think, oh well, she's new to autism, she's new to this diagnosis, like you've only just got it. But actually, you've been living your whole life as autistic, and I think people don't realize that you don't just like become autistic when you get the diagnosis. Like you've been living that whole thing.
Yeah, and that's it's funny because like obviously you'll know this, what part of our brain, part of the autistic brain is that it works in very straight lines, and so the logic when people are like, how do you know what it's like to be an autistic child? You only found out when you were 39, and you're like, still an autistic child, just didn't know I was autistic. Like, you still have every experience, emotion, feeling, you just don't know what the name of it is. And obviously that becomes frustrating because when people use arguments like that, my linear brain goes, you're not making sense. That doesn't compute. Sorry. But you do get that. You get that, and I'm completely open about the fact that, this is a new journey for me because I only self-diagnosed last July. So it's less than a year. And obviously I've tried to find out as much as I can. I'm reading books. I'm talking to people about it, but I don't know everything about autism. And I have a very didactic voice. So I have a very Lisa Simpson-esque, I know everything, sit down, I'm going to teach you kind of voice. That's my tone. That's not because I think I know everything. That's just how I speak. So I'm really open to finding out more. And I know I get it wrong. I described non-speaking autistic people as non-verbal the other day. And someone rightly pointed out that's not the same. And I really appreciate when people are correcting me because I don't know everything. Yeah. But I do know what the life experience of being an autistic person is.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's the thing, like, even just as a basic level human, we're going to get things wrong. We're going to label things wrong. And like at the moment, I really I appreciate that people like to be referred to as like, I have autism or I am autistic. And I always struggle to know how to kind of say the right thing around that. And that's something that I, struggle with and always try and ask people, like, how would you like me to refer to you? Because people want, people, I don't know, don't always like having the label of autism, whereas it's something I really appreciate, and I imagine it's something you really appreciate, being late diagnosed. But there's a lot of things you can say wrong and not realise, and it's it's all about learning and being able to apologise and say, oh, sorry, I didn't realise that. You're never going to know everything.
Yeah, and I think also I completely agree. I think it's being open to making mistakes, especially when you're on a relatively public stage. If I don't tweet or speak or do interviews or podcasts because I'm scared of using the wrong word or the wrong terminology, then I won't be able to do any of it, because of course I'm going to get things wrong, and I'm open to being told to shut up. But I think it's important that I'm making mistakes that other people might be making, that they need to know as well. And also the other problem I have is that because of my black and white thinking, which is extremely strong in my case, so I know it's across the board an autistic quality, but even in my clinical diagnosis, the psychologist was like, you are particularly black and white. And I was like, wow, even for an autistic person, I'm black and white. So I have a tendency to come down hard on one side or another. So that can get me in trouble. And I'm having to try and learn to be a little less, a little more grey area, I guess. Not because I necessarily agree with the grey area, but because I will upset people by being quite so, this is bad, this is good, you are right, you are wrong.
It's difficult though when that's built into you to try and get around that or try and see things from a different perspective. I definitely get that.
Yeah, and it can make the autistic community quite an intense place, because we are all like that essentially. That is our build, that is how we're made, and so you do get a lot of this is right, no this is right, no this is wrong, and that's great, and it's actually quite funny a lot of the time, especially because we're aware of it. So a lot of the time you'll be like, I'm very sorry if that comes across as incredibly pushy, but that's just my tone of voice. But I am trying not to be quite so strongly opinionated about, maybe not actually that knowledgeable about yet, which runs against the grain for me.
Yeah. No, I definitely
I'm an expert on everything.
So you mentioned about your MA in Shakespeare, and I always like to ask my guests about their hobbies and special interests. Is Shakespeare an ongoing passion for you, and have you got any more other kind of interests and stuff that you do when you're not writing?
Yeah, I mean, I think my my life special interest, the thing that drives me, is my writing. That's my that's the one that's never gone away. And in terms of other special interests, I have kind of lifelong kind of passion hobbies that I dip into, on a cyclical basis. So I don't normally do all of them at the same time. I'm normally I've always loved Tudor England.
Okay.
Used to read all about that when I was younger. In fact, I did so many projects on Tudor England at my primary school. But my teacher was like, you can't make every single project about Tudor England. I'd be like, art project, let's do Tudor England. History, let's do Tudor England. Literature, and they were like, that's not how it works. So yeah, I've loved that, and I still have very strong feelings about. I've seen pretty much every TV or film version or book that I could get my hands on. What else do I love? Greek mythology, big fan of that.
Okay.
Love learning about that, and tried to do a fancy dress party, but it didn't quite work out. I wanted everyone to dress up like particular gods and goddesses.
Okay.
It would have been amazing. Shakespeare, yes, although admittedly I haven't really read it for a while, so I tend to just more veer towards the film version now that I'm lazy and old. Also have weird things that I collect, so I collect sunscreen, which it's again one of those gender things where talking to a psychologist, she's like, do you have any collections? And I was like, sunscreen, does that count? She's like, how many sunscreen do you have? And I was like, the moment I have 17 open bottles. She was like, yes, that counts. That counts. So yeah, I'm very into like skincare generally.
Okay.
Quite obsessive about that. Know a lot more about the skin than I probably should. I have I collect portraits of women, which sounds very weird, and I didn't realise I was doing it until I announced at a school speech once. They said, "Do you have any hobbies or things you collect?" And I said, "I collect pictures of girls."
Oh no!
A school full of children, and literally the teachers, just their faces, and I went, "Not like that. I collect portraits." Because I travel a lot. Traveling is one of my passions, which I think is quite rare for an autistic person, from what I can tell. But I travel a lot, and from every country I go to, I get a picture or portrait of an Indigenous woman from that country.
Okay.
So I have quite a lot of those. Yeah, what else? Yeah, I have various hobbies, and sometimes they just come and go quite quickly. So at the moment, I'm kind of starting to be interested in this American Civil War. But it might not stick. I might not stick to that one. But yeah, I have a lot of, and I love them. So it never really makes sense to me when people are like, it's weird that you have this collection, or it's weird that you have this kind of obsession. And I'm like, something that makes me happy. So something that makes me happy and hurts nobody, you find weird. Like,
exactly. And that's why I always ask people, because I find it like utterly fascinating what people like choose to deep dive into. And
what do you deep dive into?
I'm very much like you in terms of like you have your kind of writing as a career and special interest. I kind of have design as like a career and special interest. So that's like a real thing for me. That's
thing, right? That's like
it doesn't feel like I'm working when I'm like designing. So that's why I love doing it as a job as well.
Yes. And does it feel with you like it's like, I always feel like it's kind of part of me, as in it's literally woven into my being.
Yeah. I can't imagine not doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like breathing. But also like it's magical, like it's come from outside me. Like I know in the old days they used to call like muses, and they, or what's it called? Genius. I think there was a talk by Elizabeth Gilbert about it. Okay. In the old days, when you were an artist and you were inspired, you used to blame, I think it was the genius, which was an outside force that gave you ideas. And I do kind of feel like sometimes that's what it's like. It's like it's almost like magical, like it's coming from somewhere that's not you, which, I love. What else do you like?
That's a really good question. I have a large collection of plants. I'm a little bit obsessed with like succulents and just trying to grow as many as physically possible. So it's kind of out of hand at the moment. But
no, it will never be out of hand, and you should never be. That's the neuronormative narrative pressing down on you. You're allowed as many plants as you like.
Yeah, it just, I don't know, it just fills me with joy to see them and like I don't know, track their like progress.
I love plants, but I can't keep them alive, and it makes me too sad. So I feel bad about collecting plants, so I don't do it as much now.
It's a commitment. It is such a commitment, and you're really? Just like, oh God, I'm responsible for these.
Imagine being a mum. Oh my God.
I know. That's like you saying earlier about like considering like, in Grey's Anatomy, like her not going kind of, down the route of having children and stuff like that. I'm like, how do people like, I'm struggling to care for myself daily. Like, how are they responsible for, smaller beings as well? Like,
a mystery to me. And it's a conversation that like I'm still getting my head wrapped around, but it's one that I'm fascinated in talking about on a wider basis as well. Like, women and children and with autism combined with that, like, there are so many amazing autistic parents. So obviously it doesn't preclude you, but from my perspective, I'm like, like you say, keeping myself alive and sane is a full-time job.
Yeah, exactly.
And so many of the things that make me happy wouldn't happen if I had kids. So my ability to write as much as I do, or my ability to travel, or my ability to sleep a lot, or have peace and quiet, which is something that I desperately I need to function. So I'm fascinated by it, and I think what was really important about that Grey's Anatomy storyline was that it's not really been covered as much as it should have been in the media. Not a woman who can't have children, but a woman who doesn't want them. Just because she doesn't want them, and she doesn't need a reason, she doesn't need a defense against it. And actually what I loved as well was when Christina says, when Owen is sort of saying, but if you had a child you'd love it, and Christina's like, I know I would, I'm not a monster.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not about would I love a child or not. Of course I would love my child.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Will it make my life happier? I don't necessarily think so. So, it's, or would I have to give up too much of myself for it? Which is kind of where I'm at, in that I think that, and I don't mean myself as in my time, because obviously that too, but I mean as in my, too much of my inner being would have to change in order to be a mother, essentially.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree.
Wrong with saying that,
Yeah, exactly. And that, just like you said, it's not that you wouldn't love, the child. It doesn't fit with you right now or potentially ever, and it doesn't have to be this like rite of passage that every woman has to go through, because when you go on social media, it feels like you have to get married and have children and be settled and follow this kind of, I don't know, it's kind of unsaid, but you just kind of feel like, as a woman, I feel like you kind of have to hit these milestones almost. And actually, no, you don't. You can do life exactly the way you want to, and you don't have to, be questioned by people, and you don't have to actually give people answers if you don't want to. So I think it's great that you've said that it's something you thought about.
Yeah, and it's something that I will talk about more going forwards in my life, but because I'm still very much working it out for myself, it's something that I probably am a little more quiet about. But I do think that, and I there's a piece that comes to being older, because now I'm nearly 40. I'm realizing just what I need and what I don't need and what I want. And there's less shame in not hitting those milestones. Like, I'm not married, I'm not in a relationship, I have no pets, I have no particular interest in having children. Like, I have a niece that I adore, but I'm happy to send her back at the end of the day. I have a career that I love, that I'm passionate about, and I'm creative in a way that, fills me with such joy. And I can travel whenever I want to, when COVID isn't still going on. And there are different paths for different people. And I think that that's something that, we really have to start opening up the conversation about, because one life does not fit all. And there's a bliss in being able to say, actually, my path, my journey is going to look different.
Definitely. And I think it's really nice to hear you say that as well, like back to me, and it's just knowing that you're not alone in that feeling as well is nice. Well,
we have, especially as neurodivergents, we have a life of being given the neuronormative brain and way of being and way of speaking and things that they want and things that make them happy. And we spend our lives trying to fit into that mold and realizing it doesn't work. And I kind of feel the same way about, the whole kind of children, house picket fence and all that kind of stuff, because it may make some people happy, it may make some autistic people happy or neurodivergent people happy, but it makes everybody happy. And I think that part of going away in realizing that you are autistic, there's a relief in going, hang on, if my brain doesn't work like their brain, then it makes sense that their life wouldn't work for me either.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And just a kind of like couple of last questions. So how have you found the pandemic? Like, how have you found it in terms of, like still writing and obviously like, your diagnosis as well? Like, has it been a lot to juggle?
Yeah, it's been immense amounts. Like, to be honest, it's, I'm kind of on a hiatus at the moment just because that's a lot to process, global pandemic, living on my own for a year and a half, literally not seeing anyone but my sister for a year and a half. And, just plus finishing my last book series and finding out I'm autistic. So that has been a period of great change internally and externally. And like I said earlier, I think it's, coming off almost the treadmill of life in order to live alone for the pandemic. is kind of what led me to realise that I'm autistic. So it's been horrible on many, many, many levels, but there has been a few silver linings.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear there's been like some positives to it, and I appreciate that.
How about for you?
Yeah, it's been weird. I think for me, I usually work in an open plan office, and I've been able to work from home, and now I never want to go back to an office. So I'll have to cross that bridge when, I don't know, they want me to go back in. But it's just, I feel obviously grateful the fact that I still have a job and stuff like that, and that actually I really hope we can keep this kind of hybrid way of working, really, because for a lot of, disabled or neurodiverse people, it really works, I think.
Yeah. Well, we don't live in a society that's built for us, really, do we? And
no.
One of the reasons that unemployment is so high for people that are neurodivergent or disabled is that we are not. These environments don't necessarily make us productive. Whereas if we support and, shift the way that we do things, then, we can be as good as, if not better, at many, many things. So I think that's, I'm the same in that, like, I work from home, and actually my way has been to go the opposite way since the pandemic. So, I have a studio space now with other creative people that I go into probably twice a week. Just so that I'm not completely alone all the time. Because I realised after a year and a half of literally just me and my dead plants, that it wasn't good for my mental health. Like, I was getting really depressed. Because although I am a loner, I do also need humans that I can, have that interaction with as and when I want to. So I go in, but even going into an office now for one day will wipe me out for another 2 days. So I'll do like 1 day on, 2 days off.
That's good. That's a good way of doing it. And that's nice to be able to dip in and just not feel like you have to be there all the time. Yeah.
And hopefully they'll let you they'll be a bit more flexible. I think they're going to change. I think it is going to be more flexible going forwards.
I hope so. And I feel like a lot of us have proved we can work from home and we don't need to be, watched in the office. So,
I think a lot of us work better from home, to be honest, because we can get on with it. We're not distracted and we're not overwhelmed by lights and noise and other colleagues and,
Exactly. It's a nightmare open plan office. It really is.
Yeah. From obviously, people, we're sensorily sensitive, hence why 21 and sensory, right?
Yeah.
But, that on that level, offices, just overwhelming.
Yeah, just so many little things, like people bringing in their food and their bright, fluorescent bike jackets, which I always say, but it's just all these little things and constant conversation. I'm just how do people work in this place?
I don't know. There's a guy that whistles outside my studio. There's a car garage that's underneath our studio.
Okay.
The cars themselves are quite quiet usually, but Mechanic loves whistling and singing, and he's a really, really nice guy. But I get so distressed. I have to put in earplugs, otherwise I go a little bit.
It just grates on you, doesn't it? It just. Oh.
Yeah, it does feel like someone's literally I don't know about for you, but for me, sound is physical. Do you find that?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, but I can feel sounds in my body, in different parts of my body. So different sounds will feel like different things. If someone screaming might be like a prickling along the back of my shoulders, or someone shouting might be, I don't know, so a stabbing sensation in my right earlobe or whatever. So I feel sounds on a physical level, which be on a life basis just really, really overwhelming. Especially in an office, you can't be shut up.
If only.
Yeah, it feels like I'm being kicked in the stomach by your whistling.
Yeah, if people knew that, they'd be like, oh geez, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Well, they wouldn't stop, but at least they might understand why you're glaring at them.
Exactly. Might be a little bit more understanding.
Yeah.
I was going to say to you, is there anything that you want to promote? Surely there are, your books and things that you might want to mention.
Yeah, I'm not good at self-promotion. So, I have books. My publishers would probably like me to mention my last book, which was Love Me Not, which is the third book in the Valentine series. But I'm happy to just chat, to be honest.
Great. At least we got that in there somewhere. It's all good.
Yeah. Post it in.
Yeah. At the end, it's there. Don't worry.
I've had so much fun. Thank you so much.